Alright, hello. My name is Ela Walker. A presentation is on gender identity disorder, and I hope you enjoy. Even though I call it gender identity disorder, that's a rather outdated term and it's more well known as gender dysphoria or GD. But essentially, it is a disorder, not a mental issue. It's not really a mental disorder. It's like a misalignment of the self. So it's when an individual does not feel comfortable in their gender role or their societally expected gender role, because it also differs depending on where you grew up. But essentially, in people assigned male at birth, uh, they tend to have a disgust or unease uh, when they appear male, they're perceived as male, or they're forced to act male. And the same goes for people assigned female at birth. They feel unease when they're expected to act feminine, look feminine, or place themselves in feminine roles. Um, Mind you, it's a lot more complex than that, and I'm only dealing with the binary today because, like I said, insanely complex, and there's a heavy nuance to gender, just gender alone, that could not be fit into this presentation, and we simply as a species do not have a grasp on. So, yeah. Um, what causes gender dysphoria? Um, so for the most part, we kinda think we know, um, but the main theory is called hormone washing, and you can see it right here. Known as hormone washing, during development, the fetus can be exposed to more of the opposite hormone. So if a person is born with a penis, they might be overexposed, or they might be exposed more to estrogen, and that could possibly cause a different type of brain development, which more lies more in line with people assigned female at birth, and that can cause gender dysphoria and then a need to transition. Now, it's not foolproof because that's really only dealing with the binary, and being trans exists in many different shapes, and there's a possibility that having these different brain composition doesn't exactly mean you'll be trans, if if even queer. So it's a very complex thing. Uh, but the reason why we know so little is, in my opinion, of course, due to the book burnings carried out by Hitler's Nazis in Nazi Germany in the 1940s. Uh, and of course, Western Europe's intervention in the development of the New World, so North America, South America, Central America, the destruction of Africa, and the apartheid state in India, and the prison state that was built on top of Aboriginals in Australia. Of course, there are many different places in the world, but because of Western Europeans Western Europe's reach across the world, it has essentially set us back further from understanding exactly what gender dysphoria is. I discussed this, or I stated this very briefly in my first slide, but the symptoms can range from a disgust of secondary sex characteristics, so a disgust of the penis, a disgust of facial hair, body hair, a disgust of muscle, height, uh, just like very. Sometimes it can be very obvious, like how I just stated, or it can be very subtle. So it can be the Adam's apple, it can be the voice, uh, it's things that don't appear feminine. But for women, for children, it's in some cases you can notice this if they have a preference to be around the opposite gender, or play with things, or dress as, or act like the opposite gender. Once again, not foolproof. It's never that simple, and it's really only up to the individual to voice whether or not they're dysphoric. It's not something that can be seen. Um, and also, and some other times, this can also cause low self-esteem, depression, etc. It can cause severe mental anguish. All right, the prevalence of gender dysphoria is low. Um, it's lack of appearance in the human population, even though it's not that small. It's give or take like around 100 million or around 250 million. But you can contribute that number to the fact that it's not a very well understood or very well accepted phenomenon. And of course, I went over what exactly happened and why it's not very well received, of course, to the Western European intervention. Uh, and only around 1.4 of Americans identify as trans or even gender nonconforming. So if you cut out people who are not gender nonconforming and people who are uh, who would be considered trans, which of course is another very very gray area. That's a very very small amount of people. Um, so it just goes to show how difficult the lives of trans people are uh, when there's such a small amount of people. When there's such a small amount of them, they don't exactly have that a sense of community that a lot of other minority groups have. Now, like I said, gender identity is not something that can be easily seen from an outside perspective. Uh, and of course, that can lead to a misdiagnosis. And sometimes that can be just somebody with body dysmorphia, or somebody who has like doesn't properly view themselves, or has an improper view of themselves. This does not mean that an individual with gender dysphoria does not have body dysmorphia, because it's not 10 times out of 10 they do. 10 times out of 10 they do, but that does not mean that just because you have body dysmorphia you'll have gender identity disorder. Um, Another disorder that might be misread as GD could be a transvestic disorder, which is essentially just the shame felt from people. It's usually men. Um, the shame they feel after reaching sexual climax, after wearing female clothing, and in around I think around 20% of people diagnosed with psychotic disorders, uh, that 20% do experience uh, opposite sex delusions, but those delusions usually dissipate after that psychotic episode has ended. Point simple, the way to treat gender identity disorder is to support the individual with gender identity disorder. That is by far the most important thing, because there is no conceivable way an individual can love themselves if nobody else around them teaches them what love is. So they must be supported by loved ones. Of course, there must be therapy. There must be like psychiatry, so they can be screened for it, and then they can be put on any medicine. So they can be put on anti-anxiety, anti-psychotic, anti-depression pills just to help with their dysphoria, or at least help with their depression that the dysphoria causes. And then lastly, not all trans people have to do this. Sometimes trans people change how they groom themselves, change how they just look uh, before they do this, which is the use of hormones. Now, when it comes to hormones, it's very, very cut and dry. Usually take estrogen. After you take estrogen, they raise your dosage, and eventually you take a high enough dose, and you take that for years on end, and eventually a trans person will begin to appear how they want to appear. And sometimes they may pursue surgery such as facial feminization surgery or bottom surgery, so they have a vaginoplasty and have their penis inverted. I'm talking about trans women here. Uh, that's my experience. That's the only thing I know. I'm not a trans man, so I'm talking from my experience. Um, so yeah, that's usually how gender identity disorder is treated. Final thoughts. There's a lot of misinterpretations of the trans experience, and I hope I provided some insight on that experience. All right, these are my sources, and I appreciate you for listening. I hope you have a good day, and thank you.